The camera I'm going to review today is a camera that I first started using about 5.5 years ago when I first got back into film photography. The copy I had back then was a copy I found on the local used market, and it did very well for me for a few years before I decided to sell it. Not long after I sold it, I kind of regretted it, and regretted it even more once I started making these videos because I wanted to go back and talk about that camera. Thankfully, a couple months ago I picked up another copy, and I've been shooting with it off and on ever since. And today we're going to talk about that camera, and that camera is the Canon EOS Elan 7. And if you've seen these videos before, you know I tried to have photo samples as well from these cameras. And just like always, the photo samples are near the end of the video, so please stick around until then. And if you must, skip till the end to see the photo samples. But I hope you'll stay through the whole thing. So let's get started. The Elan 7 was released in the year 2000 and replaced the Canon Elan 2 and 2E. I'm going to jump right into the pros and cons of this camera because I think some of the factors that differentiate this camera from the other Elan models are some of the intangibles, some of the aspects of it that can't be measured with numbers. So let's start with the negatives or cons of this camera. This list is nearly identical to the 2E because the Elan series carries a lot of similarities between the different models. And the first one is the lack of spot metering. Just like with the 2E, it has partial metering as the smallest way to meter. This camera has a 10% area, which is ironically slightly larger than the 2E, which is 9.5%. But partial metering is the smallest metering area, and the other choices are evaluative metering and center weighted metering. When my camera has the spot meter option, it's usually what I choose because most of what I shoot is landscape and street photography in city scenes and whatnot. That being said, I've been very, very successful with these cameras that don't have spot metering, so the lack of it is really not that big a deal. But again, it's one of those differences between some of these cameras that it's worth noting. Another common negative or con is the max shutter speed, topping out at 1/4000th of a second. EOS film camera models like the A2, the EOS 3, and the 1N and 1V go up to 1/8000th. Plenty fast for almost all photography. But again, if you're looking for that 1/8000th capability, you're not going to find it in this model. Another common negative that this shares with the 2E is the LCD screen on top, although very informative and useful, is smaller in size than some of the other models in the lineup. Even smaller than the original Elan, which had a slightly larger LCD screen. Granted, they were willing to give that trade-off of a smaller LCD screen to redesign it into a more compact package and to add other specific design elements to the body. You don't really lose out much because the information you need is in the small screen that's there. It's just presented in a smaller, slightly more compact and slightly busier group of information. Another con that it shares with the 2E is the data in the viewfinder, and the viewfinder itself is slightly smaller than the A2 or EOS 3, and therefore the exposure scale that you see inside is presented in a smaller way, so it doesn't have as much room to be displayed, so you don't feel like you're getting that precise adjustment as you are on the other ones, even though you are, because you still have the same obviously you still have the same aperture shutter adjustment relationship, but it just doesn't show you the smaller steps between exposure stops as you would see when you have a larger exposure scale. Since most of these pros and cons are measured by comparing them to other models in this lineup and to what is available now with some of the Canon DSLRs and whatnot, as far as what I shoot and what affects my workflow, those are pretty much the only negatives I could think of on this camera. As far as what I shoot and what affects my workflow. Those are the only negatives that I could think of on this camera. So let's just move on to the positives and all the upsides of it. The first thing you'll notice when you go online, you watch some of the B-roll shots in this video of the camera, is the design difference between this and the 2E. And really, I guess you should say that the 2E was kind of an anomaly design-wise. It kind of sticks out compared to the previous Elan and to this Elan. This camera has an all-black body. The build quality of the Elan 7 is really, really good. Now I'm reviewing this with the vertical battery grip on there. I've debated on whether to take it off for the review, but I just like the way it feels, so I left it on there, and I'll talk more about the grip specifically at the end. But the build quality in this camera is superb. It just feels really well made all the way around. People talk endlessly about the amount of plastic on some cameras made from the 90s onward, but not all plastic is created equal, and the material that's used on this camera, that's a mix of metal, a mix of plastic, high quality plastic, it all comes together to make a camera unit that feels professional, feels really well built and durable. In terms of build quality, it feels like a camera you could have for a very long time. And like I said, this is the second model I've owned, and both have felt really solid. I can definitely vouch for the quality of it. The viewfinder in this camera is great, and it's definitely on the positives list. Yeah, it's slightly smaller than the EOS 3, but overall, it's a really, really wonderful viewfinder. And it has the exposure scale inside, which is another positive and pro about this camera. I like having the exposure scale, and I'm happy that for the most part, most of these cameras do have it, and there's only a few that don't. And this camera is one of the ones that does have that, which is great. Some of the other positives in terms of workflow include being able to set a back button for autofocus, which is in a similar spot to the other cameras. So how I like to shoot, because of the stuff I shoot, I like to do back button autofocus and leave the shutter release on its own on that front button. A lot of people like the autofocus to be paired with the shutter release. Totally cool. The cool thing about that on this camera is that you have the choice, like many of the other EOS cameras in the Canon lineup. So it doesn't have spot metering, but it does have 3 good quality choices for other metering options. It has evaluative metering, partial metering, and center weighted metering. So depending on what you're shooting, the style of shooting that you create, there's probably one of those options is gonna work well for you. So this is definitely a camera that, in terms of metering options, gives you pretty much everything you need. Like I said, on my ideal wish list, I wish this had spot metering. It would almost be the perfect camera because of that, but can't complain too much because everything about the camera is pretty awesome. Another positive about this camera is the autofocus system. It has 7 autofocus points that increase from 5 on the EOS 2E, and it has your standard autofocus options that you've seen on other Canon EOS film cameras. I don't adjust that too often. I'm usually just in the one-shot AF most of the time. I'm usually in the center point with my autofocus anyways, but having the versatility, having those options allows you to experiment and venture out to shoot different things and play around with those settings. So it's pretty versatile when it comes to autofocus, including the amount of points it has and the other settings. Okay, so another positive on this camera that the 2E also had is the command dial on the back. This is one of those common aspects of these EOS film cameras that I really like to use. It makes the one-handed operation just a little easier because you can control the aperture with this shutter ring, with this dial on the back, and then control the shutter speed with the dial that's next to the shutter release button. The cameras that don't have the command dial, you can still do a one-handed operation. They just work slightly differently. But having that command dial on the back is a feature that I've really become accustomed to using, and it's nice to have on a camera like this. Okay, another positive that is common with some of these EOS film cameras, like the EOS 2E and some of the other ones, is the custom functions that you can adjust to make the camera work how you want it to work. There's 13 custom functions on here. Most of the time the main custom function I turn on is that back button autofocus. But again, there are other functions to play around with, so you can customize this camera's like how to fit how you want to shoot. Okay, let's talk about the design for a minute. This is the Elan 7. This is the Elan 2E. My first reaction with the Elan 2E when I started doing research on these cameras a few years ago was, well, I just didn't like the Elan 2E in terms of the way it looked online through the pictures for some reason. And there are a couple cameras that I like that. They just don't the design and the feel of it doesn't translate through pictures for me. When I got the 2E, my attitude about the design and the feel completely changed, and I came to really like it. That being said, just from a little bit of research I've done, it feels like the reaction to the 2E was similar to mine when it came out, which just makes me wonder. I have no information on this. It makes me wonder that kind of informed Canon design choices on the Elan 7. So on the 7, they reverted back to an almost all black design with the exception of the logo, and they have a mix of the textured feel for the grip and a little bit of smooth areas around the rest of the body. Another thing that differentiates this from the 2E is that this has hardly any hard angles anywhere. Everything is curved in one way or the other. So all that added up equals a really cool looking camera. For me, I think it might be the coolest looking film camera from Canon. But that's one of those things where you ask me that on another day, I may have a different answer. I just really like the design of this camera. Having a cool looking camera will do nothing for the quality of your photos, but there's nothing wrong with liking and admiring the look and design of the tools that you're going to carry around and use. There's been some comments online about the quality difference between the Elan 7 and 2E, and I even made one when I made a video about this one, saying that from memory at the time, this one felt slightly better made or had a better quality to it. Having both in my hand still may be true, but it's not as noticeable as I thought it was going to be when I was going to compare the two. Both in the build quality and in weight, they are really, really close. These two models, the Elan 2E and the Elan 7, feel very, very, very close in quality and in weight, as where the 2E technically is slightly heavier. But my point with that being is that whether you choose the 2E or 7, if you have the choice between the two, you really can't go wrong with either. But I'll get back to that in a minute. First, I want to get onto the battery grip, which, like I said, I debated on whether to review this without the battery grip, since I did that with every other camera, but not every camera has the option for the battery grip. So this one came with the vertical battery grip, but I'm happy it did because I think it's going to be a permanent fixture for me on this camera. The benefits of the grip for me is that, one, it adds to the design. I think it rounds out an awesome camera design and adds some extra elements to it. That's pretty cool. The other thing, the most important thing, besides the design and look benefit of having the vertical battery grip, there are two other benefits that are common with vertical grips that this maintains. One being power. This gives you the option to use AA batteries as opposed to just using the CR123A batteries that the body itself accepts. Having that flexibility to use AA's is nice because AA's are a lot easier to find, and depending on what brand you get and how many, your price is going to vary, but in general per battery you're going to be cheaper on the AA's, although it takes a few more. But so far the battery life with those AA's in the grip has been very, very impressive to me. One of the biggest negatives about all film cameras, no matter what brand or what year they're from, is the price and availability of batteries. They're not always easy to find no matter which camera you're talking about. And that's true for those CR123A batteries. Those are probably some of the most common in terms of camera batteries, but AA's are much easier to find. So having that added capability of battery flexibility is awesome. So that's definitely a reason to consider the battery grip. Another reason is that it does add it does give you some vertical grip functions, which sounds obvious because you assume that all grips do that, but they don't all do that. Some grips are just for battery, or just for added power and whatnot, but this gives you both. This gives you the extra batteries and also gives you a vertical rear back button autofocus and shutter release as well. This camera on the used market is between $50 and $150. It's a pretty wide range of prices. It's hard to say what price is too expensive for something like this. You kind of just have to go by feeling, but my gut says anything below 100 is a solid buy if it works and is in conditions similar to this. There was someone that commented that said they found one for $5, and that's an amazing deal. If you find any of these Elans for $5 and it works, that's something I would consider picking up. But the most common price I found on eBay at the moment is between $50 and $150, and the variation between those are just people asking just different prices. But sometimes it's with the vertical grip without, with the lens without, the condition it's in, and so on. But it really anywhere in this price range you're not going to probably regret the investment, especially if it is your first film camera. It's going to be a good choice. Would I choose this over the original Elan? Absolutely. Would I choose this over the 2E? Probably, but it's not such an easy choice between this and the 2E. It could be kind of a toss-up. How would you decide? I would say go by design. That's one thing, because functionality, they're very similar, so you're not going to really lose out on much by choosing one or the other. If you like that silver or that chrome look of the 2E, go with that. If you like the slick black, more curvy design of the 7, go with that. The other differentiating factors between those two are accessibility. I still think the 2E is one of the easier cameras to find in this lineup. The 7 is becoming a little easier, but just like with the 1N and 1V, the 7 sometimes will pop up and there'll be a whole bunch available, and then sometimes you won't find any. So the availability of these cameras could be a differentiating factor. But if you own this camera, or if you're looking for this camera, it's a great choice and a great camera. My only problem is I'm going to, at some point, need to pare down and get rid of some of these cameras after I do all these videos. So choosing which ones to keep and which ones to get rid of, that's going to be a difficult decision for me, because they are all really, really good cameras. This one I have a little more of a sentimental attachment to, because this model was the one that got me back into film photography, and I've shot a lot of really cool photos with this, both in landscape and city and street stuff. So that's pretty much it for this video of the Canon EOS Elan 7. It's an amazing camera. It's one of the best film cameras made, I think. If you see one for a good price and it's working, pick it up, add it to your film camera collection, or resell it to someone who needs one. Let me know in the comments below where you want me to go next with some of these videos. My list of cameras to review is getting pretty small. There's a few cameras in the Rebel lineup I want to get to, and hopefully eventually the 7N, the last variation of this camera, I want to review, and the 1V. In the meantime, please like and subscribe and keep an eye on the channel for more videos like this. See you soon.